And we're back with It's Time to Listen, a video podcast by Nina Meyer. Today's guest is writer and poet JJ Bola. Today, JJ and I will talk about his new novel, No Place to Call Home, Life in the UK, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Politics, Colonialism, and his hope for a brighter future. I'm Nina.
Hi, I'm JJ.
JJ, you just published a novel called No Place to Call Home. Do you want to tell the viewers about that?
So my novel, No Place to Call Home, looks at my background coming from the perspective of a Congolese family who migrated to the UK to seek asylum as refugees in the early 90s, and some of the political circumstances that they go through that brings them to that situation in their lives. And I think there's so much stereotype and stigma about, the label of being a refugee as well as being Congolese. And growing up, obviously, is very much based on the experience and understanding that I had. But there was so much that I came to discover that people weren't aware of. So writing this novel is my kind of attempt to add a little bit more information to what's currently known.
Liz, what are you saying with your title?
No Place to Call Home, really, I'm trying to evoke a particular thought or a particular feeling, particularly when we grow up. Right, and as adults, we consider home to be much more an emotion. Also, there's a lot of people who don't have a place that they can associate with calling home, and it arises a lot of conflicts. And I think a lot of people are unaware of that conflict. So I kind of wanted to make people a bit more aware of these issues, but not just limit it to a Congolese family, because it's very much a universal issue.
So how old were you when you moved to the UK?
I was seven years old, so early 90s.
So would you say that the time that you lived in Congo framed or constructed your identity the way that it is now, or would you say that the way that you identify with Congo has been something that you have invested in?
So it's a balance of both. Definitely growing up in Congo as a young boy, I have lots of memories of Kinshasa, lots of memories of Congo, and just like my early development. So in terms of like learning the language,
I still speak
Lingala. Yeah, I can give you a lesson. There's some Lingala in the book as well. So hopefully when you read it, you'll get a chance to kind of explore the language a bit and the beauty of it. When I came to the UK, it was like I was able to form a new identity while growing up in London. But a part of me was very much aware that I had come from a different place, and the older I got, the more I started to realize the importance of that. The more that I realized that I was not the same as everyone else, that I didn't have the same experience as everyone else. It kind of pushed me to focus more on trying to learn about where I came from and trying to understand my culture a lot more. And so that was one of the reasons why I made a strong attempt to try to actually continue to speak my language, to continue to be up to date with my culture, with like the music and the fashion and so on. And, if you know Congolese culture, that's a very difficult thing to keep up with because there's so much going on. It adds so much more depth to you as a human being, that you're attached to something far greater than where you just are at that moment.
And when you say that you always felt a little different, would you say that's a feeling that arose from external pressures or something that came from within?
I think the external pressure forced that something from within to come out. So, and in different circumstances. So little experiences like getting my name called wrong, or different stereotypical assumptions about where I'm from. You're from Congo, you do this, you do that. And also kind of my legal status. I remember when I started university, I didn't have like official documentation. Okay. So it was just like little experiences like that. And I think that those kind of external forces, external pressures pushed me to react a particular way. And I think people react in one of two ways. They can either use it as a way to kind of embrace their culture more and self-determine and become much more invested in who they are, or they can lose a part of themselves and change themselves to fit into the mainstream discourse and try and blend in. And I think for me, what worked best for me was for me to be able to invest myself in who I was and really ground myself in that and then go forward.
Okay.
Yeah.
Would you say that general, lessons on politics and history, would you say that you felt well represented in your heritage?
In British society, you get taught a little bit about slavery, a little bit about colonialism, and then that's it. You get taught as if it was some kind of like benevolent civilization, and I didn't feel represented. I had a lot of questions. I remember being really frustrated with my teachers because, particularly at the time, was not really much internet. Didn't really have access to internet and so forth, and so a lot of the information that I was looking for was really difficult to access. So in regards to Black and African history generally, I wasn't represented. Congolese history, there was just no representation at all. So it took like a lot of research for me to even be able to come to an understanding of Congolese history and become aware of what happened. But even still till now, even up until university level, I still see a lot of like university curriculum that still teaches the very myopic view of Western civilization and its benevolent civilizing mission in Africa, and it's very it's redundant. The information is there, so it's no longer saying, oh, you're a radical or anything like that. It's just the information is there. Just teach it according to the information.
So now that we broached education in general, where do you think European governments should place themselves in order to position themselves to the past crimes?
There's a lot of research now that clearly demonstrates that aid is not successful. That aid does not develop economies within countries. In fact, it makes people within those economies much more dependent on aid. And I think that's an issue that needs to be addressed. Western governments need to start taking the position of trade rather than aid, and trading on a similar level rather than, on a level that replicates the colonizer-colonized relationship. I think it's just a facet of that, in which what happens now. An apology, there's a lot of conversation around this as well, particularly in regards to whether an apology should occur, whether it's reparations and so forth. And a lot of governments need to be honest about the role that they played within history, and also start with an apology, but not just that, actually look into how their conquest helped to improve their economy and sustain their economy as well. If you look at a small country like Belgium, that's like over 20 times smaller than Congo. How is it that Belgium has virtually no resources, virtually has no real industry that they trade with on a global scale, but still has a bigger economy than Congo? It just doesn't make sense. And we know that this is a result of history. We know that it's a result of Leopold's kind of rubber plantations and so forth, and the exploitation. But I think the conversation needs to be had on a public scale, on an institutional scale, on a governmental scale, and then from there we need to address how people can be recompensated for not just for the lives that were lost, but also for the paid labor that was exploited. In terms of like contract law, people have not been paid for their labor. So if you just look at it from that part, take away the politics, people need to be recompensated for that part, as well as the effects that it's had on families and generations from them.
So you would be a spokesperson for reparations of that kind?
I definitely think there needs to be that conversation. That conversations need to happen, and also from both parts. Because if I look at Congo at the moment, Congo isn't politically stable. We know that the current president, Kabila, he is someone who's been allowed to maintain that position to essentially benefit the multinational corporations and the governments who are exploiting the country. So for us to demand reparations during a politically unstable climate would only benefit, Western governments. I think now at the moment we need to have stability and peace within the Congo and have a functional progressive government, and then from there we can really start talking about the issue of reparations on a scale. But before we enter that and whilst we're progressing to that, I think a lot of people need to be aware of the true role of that empire. It's like the French Empire and the British Empire. And because a lot of people are not aware, there's a governmental poll in the UK that YouGov did, and it said approximately 45% of the British population thought that British Empire was a positive mission. 45% thought it was positive. Roughly 20-30% were indifferent. So that's like the majority of the population thought, oh, it's a good thing, or I don't mind. So
is that something that's also reflected when you have conversations with British people? Do you see a lot of ignorance or maybe even disinterest when you try to talk about these issues?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of, and on every scale. It's not just because people like to assume that it's uneducated people who think this, or people who haven't gone to university and so forth. I mean, I've had this discussion on every single level, like even up to professors themselves. Sometimes I guest speak at different universities and so forth, and this is talking about political issues, Congo, African history, and so forth. And a lot of them are absolutely unaware of the full extent to which the British Empire operated. The British Empire, after slavery was outlawed from the 1800s onwards, they paid out reparations to slave owners to the sum of over 20 million, which would be billions now, if it's inflation adjusted. And a lot of people are completely unaware. So we talk about reparations, and people like to think of like reparations and so forth as just handing out free money. But people who were actually responsible for slavery were given reparations. So if the people who enforced slavery were given reparations, then reparations can be given to the victims. And this kind of misinformation still occurs on every level. It's a reflection of what's going on within the institutions. People need to be better informed.
Do you think European countries would be able to benefit from globalization the way that they do now? If it wasn't with the backbone of having African countries support them?
A lot of people within the Western nations are acutely aware that the privileges they've acquired have been off the backs of colonialism and so forth. And so in their minds, because they're aware of that relationship, they think, okay, so if the people who we've been oppressing are able to self-determine and become economically dependent, what will that mean for our quality of lives? And they see it as a relationship, as a taking away from what they currently have, and that makes them fearful. If say Congo, for instance, if Congo was left alone, free of exploitation and so forth, and not even in regards to reparations, not just completely left alone, allowed to develop its own industries, it would thrive. Congo actually has the potential to feed the whole of sub-Saharan Africa. It has a natural resource estimated worth of $34 trillion. And so the whole idea that the global south or Africa developing is at a cost to the West is just a reaction to the guilt of colonialism. People are trying to hold on to the only way they're aware of that they've got their privileges.
Or how much longer do you think Europeans and Westerners will be able to sustain this false discourse?
Well, it's ultimately about power.
Yeah.
And this is the thing that people are fighting with. It's about power, it's about who can, maintain hegemony, who can have control over the discourse. And as we're watching right now with the fastest growing economies in the world, in the global south, top 10 of which many, about 3 or 4 are African. I think what's happening now is we're witnessing an empire starting to collapse. And those who are in the elite positions are trying to attach themselves to that power, to hold on to that power, just to preserve their privilege. And I think there's only so long that can happen for. There's no empire in the world that has lasted forever. Mali conquered Europe for 800 years, and empires don't last forever. Particularly at the point now we've reached where it's like, well, we've got a damaged environment that is rapidly deteriorating day to day, right? So how much longer are we going to be fighting for power before we don't even have a planet to survive on? You know, and I think there's something that's got to happen within the human consciousness to understand and realize that, and then change. But until that happens, I'm not really sure how that's going to manifest.
You know, do you think the African countries themselves have the ability right now to just break away from it all?
Well, it's difficult because the entire world functions on a system of capitalism, right? Like, how do we pull away from the current system within which it operates? Right? And I think people only become aware of a particular issue when it starts to affect them directly. I hope it doesn't take an environmental disaster for people to realize and be aware or conscious of the impacts that their day-to-day habits and so forth are having on a general scale.
Do you think these environmental problems and generally these problems are an inherent problem of capitalism?
Capitalism operates in a way that the greater it consumes, it destroys itself whilst it's consuming. You know, so it's like a massive tumor that is unaware that the bigger it gets, the more it destroys itself or it destroys the body. So I do see there being a shift from capitalism, from an exploitative system to a system that's focused on a collective system and much more focused on development and growth. But it can only happen at the point in which people are educated and make informed decisions on a day-to-day basis.
Do you see a move away from nations themselves within Africa?
Within that, nationalism isn't the solution. Often nationalism is a reaction or an attempt to gaining power. And a lot of the borders that exist in Africa nowadays are created as colonial borders. You know, so it doesn't make sense for African nations to be inherently or overtly nationalist in an attempt to reclaim its power. But I think as we progress and people become much more informed about their rights, we look at Gambia and how the former president tried to maintain his power, but a lot of young people stood up. The median age in Africa is 19 years old. You know, a lot of these young teenagers are very energetic. They have access to internet and so forth. So they're much more aware of their rights as young people than 19-year-olds of a decade or 2 decades ago.
And do you feel that languages can be an identity forming tool?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, for me, being able to speak Lingala and hold on to Lingala is very, very important. And I didn't realize the impact that it had and its importance as well until I met other Congolese who I didn't grow up around, whose parents didn't teach them their language, you know, who didn't encourage them to speak their language. And it also just helps with how you see the world, you know, your conceptualizations. It's like there's some things that can only be expressed or understood in that language. And language definitely helps massively with identity because, you know, you're open to so much more. You can listen to music and so forth and read books and so forth from different cultures within that language. I do believe there's hope simply because, like, in terms of like the length of history, what people have gone through, no empire has lasted forever, and we're much closer to the end of this particular manifestation of empire than we are to the beginning. Yeah. You know, so I definitely do think there's hope in that something.
Okay, now in the end, I do want to go back to your novel, and why don't you just tell the viewers where to get it, again, what it's called, and when it will be available.
So it's called No Place to Call Home. It's available to pre-order now, so if you go on my website, jjbola.com, you'll be able to get it from there. And from my publisher's website, Own It. Also, I check all my social media feeds and so forth, but it will be available in June. June the 22nd is the official launch day. And yeah, you'll be able to get it in all your good bookstores, you know, so Foyles, Waterstones, all of them really. So just kind of look out for it. And yeah, tell a family member, tell a friend. And I think it's just something that will help bring a new conversation into the fold and hopefully like just add something to the narrative that doesn't exist yet.
Okay, thank you so much, JJ.
Thank you.
And yeah, everyone buy his book.